The candlelight flickered on my son's face as he said, "We're done feeding you, Mom." Still, I poured his wine with steady hands, letting the sting sink deeper than the sip. As the scent of the birthday cake thickened, so did the silence between us, cut clean by betrayal. While he toasted to new beginnings, I opened his account on my phone, unnoticed. The same fingers that once packed his school lunches now typed the final transfer. That's when I smiled and fed the bank with his future, bite for bite. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Eleanor Foster's heels clicked sharply on the polished marble floor as she made her way up the narrow driveway to Travis's house. The night air was crisp, carrying with it the distant hum of Los Angeles. She smoothed the lapels of her blazer, her fingers brushing the fine fabric, as she considered how to make the best of this evening. Her son's birthday had always been a family event, a time to celebrate the good times they'd had and perhaps mend the silent rifts that seemed to grow between them with each passing year. As Eleanor pushed open the front door, she was immediately greeted by the familiar scent of roasted chicken and fresh herbs. Laughter echoed from the living room, the sound of Travis's friends and Samantha's infectious chatter. Eleanor forced a smile, knowing this moment would be brief. Her relationship with her son had become increasingly strained over the years. Yet tonight, she thought, she could overlook it, at least for a few hours. "Mom, you made it!" Travis's voice boomed from the living room. His tall frame appeared from behind the kitchen island, his broad shoulders filling the doorway. He was grinning, though it seemed a little strained, like he was trying too hard to make things feel normal. Eleanor kissed his cheek, taking in the carefully curated decorations, bright balloons, festive streamers, everything meticulously arranged. "Happy birthday, Travis," she said warmly, but the smile she gave him didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thanks. Let me grab you a drink?" he said, motioning toward the bar. Eleanor shook her head. "I'm fine. I just came to be with you all." And for the first few moments, everything seemed almost perfect. They chatted about trivial things, the weather, old family memories, the gossip surrounding some of their mutual acquaintances. For a brief, fleeting moment, it felt like things had not changed. The laughter was real, the warmth genuine. But, as always, the dark cloud looming over her son's financial struggles eventually broke through. "So, Mom," Travis began casually, though there was an edge to his voice now. "I've been thinking about, well, you know, how I'm handling things. The business is in a tight spot right now." Eleanor's heart dropped. She had hoped this night would remain untouched by the constant demands that had worn her down in recent years. Still, she steeled herself. "What kind of tight spot are we talking about?" "Well," Travis hesitated, but only for a moment. "I need a loan, a big one, to tide me over, you know?" He threw a glance at Samantha, who was perched on the armrest of the couch, nodding along, her fingers absently tracing the rim of her wineglass. Eleanor's stomach tightened. She had heard this pitch before. "I'm not sure that's a good idea, Travis." "Mom, you've helped me before," Travis pressed, his voice now edged with impatience. "It's just a temporary thing. I'll pay you back, of course. You can't just leave me high and dry." Eleanor felt the warmth drain from her body, replaced by a familiar rising frustration. "I'm not your personal bank, Travis. You need to start figuring out how to manage your own finances. You've had enough chances." Her voice was calm but firm, betraying none of the growing anger inside her. For a split second, Travis's expression faltered as though he hadn't expected this response. The mood in the room shifted slightly, like the sudden flicker of a candle's flame. But then, without warning, his face hardened, and he snapped, "We're done feeding you. You've had enough of our help." The words hit Eleanor like a slap. A cold, sharp sting ran through her chest. The entire room seemed to freeze. Even Samantha, who had been lounging lazily, shot a quick glance toward Travis, as if she too was shocked by his outburst. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. For a moment the words reverberated in her ears. Done feeding you. Was this how her son truly felt about her now? The woman who had given him everything, worked tirelessly for his future, only to have him lash out in front of everyone? Her cheeks burned with humiliation, but she refused to let him see the depth of her hurt. She kept her voice steady. I'm not here to be your source of income, Travis. You need to take responsibility for your own life. The silence that followed was suffocating. Travis's eyes were dark, filled with an anger that Eleanor hadn't seen before. Samantha stared at her face expressionless, but the disdain was unmistakable. Eleanor forced herself to look away, though her heart was breaking. She didn't need to look at her son to know what was going through his mind. This wasn't just about money, it was about control. And as much as she wanted to hold on to the image of a loving, supportive family, the truth had never been clearer. I think I should go, Eleanor said, her voice quiet but resolute. Travis didn't try to stop her. Instead, he turned away, muttering something under his breath as he disappeared into the kitchen. Samantha's eyes followed Eleanor, but there was no sympathy there, only a cold, calculating distance. Eleanor took one last lingering look at the scene before her. The laughter from earlier, the facade of warmth, all felt so far away now. She felt like an intruder in her own family. As she made her way toward the door, she heard Travis's voice again, this time from the other room, his words tinged with bitterness. Good riddance! Eleanor's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Her throat felt tight, but she swallowed down the lump, pushing the pain deep inside. She wasn't going to break. Not tonight. Not ever again. But the truth was clear now. This wasn't just about money. It was about respect. And Eleanor had finally had enough. Eleanor's hands trembled as she turned the key in the front door, the familiar creak of the wood marking her return to the sanctuary of her home. But this house, which had once been a refuge, now felt foreign. The laughter and warmth of Travis's birthday had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow silence. She kicked off her heels and walked through the living room, the sharp click of her footsteps echoing in the quiet space. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of everything that had transpired. Her mind replayed the moments from the party, the icy sting of Travis's words, the finality in his tone. We're done feeding you. The words looped in her head, taunting her. How could he say that? After everything she had done for him, after all the sacrifices. She'd spent years providing for him, smoothing over his mistakes, taking on the weight of his irresponsible choices. And yet, this was how he repaid her, by humiliating her in front of the very people she had hoped would one day support her. Eleanor collapsed onto the couch, her fingers gripping the armrest as if it might anchor her in place. She leaned her head back, staring at the ceiling, letting the tears she had held back all night finally come. They were silent, the kind that didn't make a sound, but felt like an avalanche breaking inside her chest. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She hadn't even heard the doorbell. She wiped her eyes quickly, trying to gather herself before the person on the other side saw how much she was unraveling. Eleanor? It's me, Claire. With a deep, steadying breath, Eleanor stood, walking toward the door and opening it to reveal her best friend standing in the hallway, a worried frown etched on her face. Come in, Eleanor murmured, stepping aside. Claire entered, her presence as calming as it was strong. She immediately took in the state of the room, Eleanor's stiff posture, her eyes red from crying. Without saying a word, Claire walked over to the couch and sat next to her, placing a hand gently on Eleanor's. You don't have to talk about it if you're not ready, Claire said softly, but Eleanor couldn't hold it in anymore. Her voice cracked as she spoke. He said I've had enough, that I've been feeding him for too long, that he's done with me. Claire's eyes softened, but the anger was unmistakable in her tone when she responded. The nerve of him. I'm sorry, Eleanor. Eleanor shook her head, her heart heavy. I don't know why this is hitting me so hard. I thought he would be different. That after all I've done for him, he would at least respect me. I know, Claire said quietly. But you've been taking the brunt of his irresponsibility for far too long. You've let him lean on you, and now that he's outgrown that comfort, he's lashing out. Eleanor's gaze shifted to the window, the dim light of the evening casting long shadows on the walls. I've been blind, Claire, for years. Every time he asked for more, I gave it to him. Every time he messed up, I bailed him out. I thought it was what a mother does. But maybe I've been enabling him all along. Claire's voice grew firm, her hand tightening on Eleanor's. You've been a mother, Eleanor, a good one. But it's time to stop being his safety net. You're not doing him any favors by continuing to feed his entitlement. Eleanor swallowed hard, taking in Claire's words. She knew deep down that Claire was right. She had let Travis manipulate her emotions, used her love as a tool to keep him tethered to her, even when it was clear he didn't appreciate it. And now, she had to face the truth. This wasn't about love anymore. It was about power. Travis wanted control, and she had given it to him. I can't let him do this to me anymore, Eleanor whispered, her voice gaining strength. I've worked too hard for everything I have, and if he's going to treat me like this, then he doesn't get to have access to it anymore. Not a cent. Claire nodded in approval, her eyes steady. You're right. You've got every right to protect yourself, Eleanor. This isn't just about the money. It's about your dignity, your future. He's not going to change unless you make him face the consequences. Eleanor's gaze hardened as the realization set in. She wasn't going to be a victim of her own generosity anymore. This wasn't just about defending her wealth, it was about reclaiming her sense of self. She would no longer be the one who picked up the pieces of Travis's mess. Without saying anything more, Eleanor stood up, crossing the room to her desk where her phone lay charging. Her fingers hovered over the screen before she tapped in Michael's number, the lawyer who had helped her set up her finances, the one who had always been her ally. She needed his counsel, and she needed it now. As the phone rang, her pulse quickened. She hadn't taken action yet, but tonight would be the turning point. She would no longer allow Travis to control her, to dictate the terms of her own life. Eleanor had worked for her wealth. She had earned it, and she would protect it fiercely. Michael, it's Eleanor, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. I need to talk to you about something important, something that can't wait. As she listened to him respond, her thoughts crystallized with a cold certainty. She was going to do whatever it took to make sure Travis couldn't touch her money. She would put a stop to this once and for all. And as she ended the call, a weight lifted from her shoulders. The first step was already in motion. The quiet hum of the city outside her window was almost comforting as Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her. The soft glow of the screen illuminated her face, casting long shadows across the room. She had never felt more awake, more certain of what she needed to do. Travis's words echoed in her mind, but now they were nothing but fuel for the fire she was about to ignite. He had crossed a line, and now it was time for her to reclaim control over her life, her future. She clicked open the link to her online banking account, her fingers steady despite the gravity of the moment. The numbers on the screen felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. Her heart beat a little faster as she began scanning her assets, reviewing the accounts that had once felt like her security, her life's work. But they had also become a vulnerability, a weapon Travis had used against her for too long. That was going to change. Her thoughts drifted to Derek, her financial advisor. He had always been professional, calm and meticulous, someone she trusted implicitly. But today, his guidance would take on a new urgency. She needed him now, more than ever. Picking up her phone, Eleanor dialed his number with a sense of resolve. It rang twice before he picked up. "Eleanor?" Derek greeted warmly. "How's everything going?" "It's going," she replied, her voice firm, not betraying the tumult of emotions just beneath the surface. "I need to talk to you about some changes. Immediate changes." "I'm listening." She exhaled, mentally preparing herself for what she was about to request. "I want to freeze certain accounts. Temporarily. I need to make sure no one can access them, not even Travis. And I need to set up a separate account. Something that's just mine. Only mine." Derek paused, the silence on the other end of the line making Eleanor's stomach tighten. Then he spoke, calm as ever. "I understand. We can do that. But you'll need to be very clear on how we're structuring this. It's going to take a few steps to ensure everything is secure." "Just get it done, Derek," Eleanor replied, her voice hardening. "I'm done being taken advantage of." "You're absolutely right," he said, his tone reassuring. "Let's make sure no one can touch your wealth, especially when it comes to your son. I'll start the process of freezing accounts and setting up the new one. We'll also need to revise your will to make sure Travis and Samantha have no access to your assets in the future." "Good," Eleanor said, "and I want to set up a trust fund for Rachel. She deserves to have her future protected, no matter what happens with the rest of this family. I want it structured so there's no way anyone can influence it, not even Travis." "Understood," Derek said, his professionalism unwavering. "We'll make sure Rachel's trust is secure. I'll draw up the paperwork and send it to you for review. You're making the right decision." Eleanor felt a sense of relief wash over her as Derek spoke. It wasn't just the practical steps she was taking. It was the emotional strength she was reclaiming. For too long, she had allowed herself to be manipulated by guilt, by love, by the hope that things would change. But now, there would be no more enabling. There would be no more silence. As the call ended, Eleanor closed her laptop and stood, walking toward the window. The city lights twinkled in the distance, the skyline stretching before her like a canvas of possibility. She felt something stir inside her, a long-buried sense of empowerment she had almost forgotten existed. She had worked hard for everything she had. She had earned it, and no one, not even her own son, was going to take it from her. With a steady hand, she picked up the phone once more. This time, it was Michael. She needed him to start drafting the legal documents, to make sure Travis's reckless behavior would have consequences. It was time for her to take the next step. The phone rang twice before Michael answered. "Eleanor," he said, his voice warm but professional. "What's going on?" "I need you to start preparing the legal paperwork to revoke Travis's access to my assets. It's time to make this official." Michael paused. "Are you sure about this? This could escalate things further than you're prepared for." "I'm sure, Michael. It's time to stop pretending that things can go back to the way they were. I'm taking control of my future." There was a moment of silence, then Michael's voice came through, steady and resolute. "I'll get started on this right away. You're making the right choice, Eleanor. I've got your back." The weight on Eleanor's shoulders lightened. She could feel the pieces falling into place, each decision strengthening her resolve. She wasn't going to be the victim of her own family's demands anymore. She was reclaiming her life, her power, and her peace. As she set the phone down, Eleanor looked at the city one last time. There would be no more second-guessing, no more doubt. She was ready for whatever came next. The battle had only just begun, but she was ready to fight. And as she sat down at her desk to prepare for the next phase, a single thought anchored itself in her mind. "They've tried to take everything from me, but they've never taken my peace. The morning light filtered through the curtains in Eleanor's bedroom, casting soft beams across the room as she rose from her bed. She didn't sleep much, her mind racing with the decisions she'd made the night before. But today was the day. The first move in her battle for control was about to happen. After a quick shower, Eleanor dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, a dark navy jacket with matching slacks, her heels clicking decisively against the marble floor of her entryway. She didn't have time for weakness today. She was done pretending to be the person everyone else wanted her to be. Today, she would take the first steps in reclaiming her life. She arrived at the bank, her heart steady, but her thoughts still wrapped around the magnitude of what she was about to do. As she entered the cool, glass-walled building, the familiar smell of coffee and polished wood greeted her. The teller behind the counter smiled politely as she approached. Eleanor didn't return the smile, her face set in a determined, unreadable expression. "I need to make a transfer," she said, her voice firm. "A large sum of money from my primary account into a separate account that only I control." The teller raised an eyebrow. "Of course, Mrs. Foster. Would you like to speak with a banker to help facilitate the transfer?" "No," Eleanor replied, her tone unwavering. "I want it done now. Please, make sure this is handled with absolute discretion." Moments later, she was led into a private office where the bank manager sat, waiting with papers and an air of professionalism. Eleanor sat across from him, her back straight, hands folded neatly in front of her. "I want this transfer to be immediate and final," she instructed. "From here on out, I want my accounts locked down. No one, not even my family, can access these funds without my express permission." The bank manager hesitated for a brief moment, his eyes scanning her with a hint of curiosity, but he nodded as though he'd dealt with clients like her before. "Of course, we'll make the necessary arrangements and ensure that all instructions are followed to the letter." The transaction was swift, efficient, just the way Eleanor liked it. As she signed the final papers, the weight of the decision settled into her chest. This was it. No more living in fear of Travis's demands. No more enabling his irresponsibility. Her wealth was hers alone, and she had made it crystal clear that it would remain that way. Once the paperwork was completed, Eleanor stood, offering a quick, polite nod to the bank manager. As she walked out of the bank, she felt lighter, more in control than she had in years. Later that afternoon, Eleanor met with Michael at his office in downtown Los Angeles. The moment she entered, he stood, offering her a brief, professional smile. But it didn't take long for him to read the intensity in her eyes. "Eleanor, I can see you're ready to move forward with everything," Michael said, motioning for her to take a seat. "I've prepared the preliminary drafts for the legal documents to sever Travis's access to your assets. We'll also include provisions to ensure that if he challenges your decisions, he will have no legal recourse." Eleanor took a seat across from him, her hands clasped together tightly. "It's time to make sure he knows that he can't rely on me anymore. I've spent too many years covering for him, and I won't do it again." Michael nodded. "Understood. We'll be thorough. It's time to protect your legacy and ensure your wishes are honored. The revisions to your will, the trust for Rachel, it's all going to be airtight." They spent the next hour going over the details, Eleanor's mind clear and focused. She had no doubts now. Travis had pushed her too far, and she was finally taking back control. The legal documents were robust, designed to stand up to any challenges he might throw her way. By the time Eleanor returned home, her pulse was still racing, the adrenaline of the day's decisions lingering in her veins. As she set her bag down on the kitchen counter, the phone buzzed in her pocket. She checked the screen, recognizing the name instantly. Travis. For a brief, painful moment, Eleanor considered letting it go to voicemail. But then, with a steadying breath, she answered. "Mom?" Travis's voice came through, hesitant, as if he weren't sure how to approach her. "I've been thinking. Have you reconsidered? About the loan? I really need it. Eleanor's grip on the phone tightened. He was still trying. She could almost hear the desperation in his voice, the last vestiges of his entitlement bleeding through. But this time, there was no hesitation in her response. No, Travis, I haven't reconsidered. I'm not lending you any more money. Ever again. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Eleanor could feel the familiar rush of anger coming from her son. You're just going to let me sink. You've always bailed me out before. You're being selfish, cold-hearted. Eleanor's lips pressed together, but she didn't let his words shake her. She had heard this all before. I'm not being selfish, Travis. I'm being responsible. You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. I'm done enabling you. This time, you're on your own. There was a sharp exhale on the other end of the line, the sound of Travis trying to contain his frustration. Fine, but don't expect me to forgive you for this. You'll regret this. Eleanor's heart didn't waver. You'll learn to forgive me in time. But I won't regret this. It's time for you to grow up. As she ended the call, a strange calm settled over her. She had made the decision, and with it, she had set the course for what was to come. Travis could fight it. He could scream, but it wouldn't matter. The money he had so easily taken for granted was no longer available to him. And as Eleanor looked out the window at the darkening sky, she knew this was just the beginning. The days following Eleanor's final conversation with Travis were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and careful calculations. But through it all, a cold, steady clarity had taken root within her. A purpose that would not be shaken. Every move she made now was a deliberate step in reclaiming the life she had once lived in service to others. That afternoon, Eleanor sat at her desk, her laptop open, her fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced precision. The accounts were locked down, the transfers were in place. But there was one thing she had yet to do: ensure her daughter, Rachel, would never be caught in the crossfire of Travis's entitlement. Her mind wandered briefly to Rachel, so often the peacemaker, caught between her brother and her mother. Eleanor had always tried to shield her from the tension, but now she knew the truth. Rachel needed protection too. She deserved it. With a sharp breath, Eleanor opened the section of her banking app dedicated to new accounts and set up an emergency fund. It was modest for now, but it would grow over time, secure, untraceable, and solely for Rachel. She named it the Security Fund, ensuring that if anything happened to her, Rachel would never go without. If Eleanor was to be stripped of her role as protector, she would ensure her daughter would never feel that loss. As she completed the setup, her phone buzzed. Michael's name flashed on the screen. She answered it without hesitation. Eleanor, I've got news. Michael's voice was steady, but she could hear the undertone of urgency. We're preparing to go to court over the trust. Travis is pushing back. He's not letting this go. Eleanor's fingers gripped the edge of her desk, the thought of Travis's continued defiance only strengthening her resolve. What's his next move? She asked, her voice a quiet reflection of the sharpness she felt inside. He's threatening to challenge your will, Michael explained. He claims your actions are unfair, and he wants access to your accounts. I'm putting together a solid case, but you should know, this is about to get ugly. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, the weight of the situation settling on her like an invisible force. She wasn't surprised by Travis's actions. He had always been a man who refused to accept accountability. But now it wasn't just about money, it was about his desperation for control. And Eleanor would not let him have it. Do whatever it takes, Michael, she replied, her voice cool, but underneath it, a pulse of determination. Make sure this doesn't just blow over. I want him to feel the consequences of his actions. I'll make sure he does, Michael affirmed. I'll update you soon. As she ended the call, Eleanor's thoughts swirled with plans. She had already removed herself from Travis's grasp, locked down everything that mattered, but she knew this fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. There would be no more excuses for Travis's behavior. He had made his choice, and now he would have to face the consequences. Days passed, and as Eleanor moved through the motions of her newly secured life, she noticed the changes around her. The atmosphere in the family had shifted. Travis's calls had become more frequent, more insistent. He demanded that she reconsider her decision, that she fix things, but she refused to relent. Each attempt he made to gain access to her accounts ended in failure, leaving him frustrated and increasingly erratic. It was the little things that betrayed his unraveling: an angry text message, a sudden outburst when they met at a family gathering, a coldness that grew with every conversation. The more Eleanor held her ground, the more Travis alienated himself from her and the rest of the family. He no longer tried to hide his resentment, and it was clear he was growing more volatile. His anger, once directed at his mother, began to spill over into other aspects of his life. His marriage to Samantha became strained, with Samantha often seen in hushed conversations, looking just as frustrated as her husband. Meanwhile, Eleanor continued her quiet work behind the scenes. The new accounts were set, the trust for Rachel was safe, and her legal battle was in motion. But as the days wore on, Eleanor felt the weight of it all, the decisions she had made, the walls she had built. And it was then that she realized something. This wasn't just about protecting her wealth or teaching Travis a lesson. This was about asserting her right to live on her own terms, free from the manipulation and guilt that had defined her life for so long. One evening, after finishing a call with Derek regarding further revisions to her financial strategy, Eleanor stood in front of her bedroom mirror, taking in her reflection. The woman who looked back at her wasn't the same person who had walked into the bank that morning, nor the one who had once tried to please everyone around her. She had evolved. She had become someone who took control of her own fate. And then, as if the universe itself was sending her a signal, her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Travis. "I'm coming for what's mine. Don't think you can get away with this." Eleanor's lips parted into a thin smile. She had expected this. The real battle was still ahead of her, and she would be ready. She set the phone down with a quiet resolve. Let him come. The courtroom was stark and imposing, the quiet murmur of whispered conversations bouncing off the marble walls. Eleanor sat at the front, her posture immaculate, her face composed, an ironclad mask of calm. The tension in the air was palpable, the stakes high. This was the moment. Travis and Samantha sat a few feet away, their eyes darting occasionally to her with barely concealed hostility. Samantha's expression was cold, her lips pressed together as she exchanged whispered words with Travis. The bitterness between them had reached a fever pitch. It was no longer just about the money, it was about power, and Travis had made it clear he wanted to take control of everything that was hers. Eleanor's lawyer, Michael, sat beside her, his focus unwavering. He had been preparing for this day for weeks, going over every piece of evidence, every nuance of Eleanor's decisions. He had already prepared her for the fact that the fight would be ugly, but Eleanor felt an unshakable confidence. She was no longer the woman she had been when this battle began, weak, uncertain, desperate to please. Now she was a woman who had nothing to prove and everything to protect. Travis rose first, his voice loud enough to carry through the quiet hum of the courtroom. "My mother has used her wealth to control us for years," he began, his words coming out in a rush, his face flushed with anger. "She's manipulated me, forced me into situations where I had no choice but to depend on her. And now she's trying to cut me off completely, without any regard for what I have done for her." His voice cracked, a hint of desperation creeping in. Samantha stood beside him, her arms folded tightly across her chest. "This isn't about money," she added, her tone sharp, accusing. It's about fairness. Travis and I deserve a share of what's rightfully ours. She's taken everything, and now she wants to leave us with nothing. Eleanor's hands remained clasped together, her gaze fixed on the pair in front of her. She could feel the weight of their words, but they were nothing more than hollow accusations, no different from the ones Travis had hurled at her in the past. She had anticipated this, and yet hearing it still sent a chill through her bones. This is the last time, she thought. The last time they'll try to take what isn't theirs. Michael stood, his calm demeanor cutting through the tension. His voice was steady, commanding. Eleanor's decisions were made with nothing but love for her family. She wanted to ensure her children had everything they needed, but she also wanted them to learn the value of hard work and independence. He turned slightly toward the judge, addressing her with a quiet respect. Eleanor has worked tirelessly for everything she has. She has earned it, and it is hers to do with as she pleases. No one has the right to claim what belongs to her, especially when her decisions were made out of love, not manipulation. There was a pause. Eleanor felt a strange sense of relief. Michael's words struck at the heart of the matter. Love, not control. The truth of her actions was finally being laid bare, and for the first time in a long while, she could feel her shoulders relax. Sophie and Travis exchanged a look, their faces tightening in frustration. They were trying to push her into a corner. But Eleanor had never felt more secure in her resolve. Michael was fighting for her, and for the first time, she wasn't alone. The courtroom shifted as Michael laid out his defense in meticulous detail. The documents were ironclad, the legal groundwork painstakingly prepared. He provided evidence that Eleanor's decisions had been made with full legal knowledge and with no intent to harm her children. As the day wore on, it became clear that Travis's case was crumbling. He had no evidence of undue influence, no proof that Eleanor had used her wealth for anything other than securing her family's future. With each failed attempt to find leverage, Travis grew more agitated. His face reddened as his arguments faltered, and the once assertive tone of his voice began to crack under the weight of the truth. Samantha, who had stood by him through it all, seemed to grow increasingly tense, her eyes darting between the judge and Travis, trying to maintain some semblance of control over the situation. But Eleanor remained calm, her focus never wavering. She had done nothing wrong. Everything she had done was to protect herself, her future, and her daughter. The judge, who had remained silent throughout the proceedings, finally spoke. The court has heard both sides, and while I acknowledge the complexity of the family dynamic here, I must say that I find no evidence to suggest that Eleanor Foster has acted in anything but her own legal rights. We will take a short recess before making a final ruling. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. The moment was almost upon her, the culmination of everything she had worked toward. She exchanged a brief glance with Michael, whose calm smile reassured her. Outside the courtroom, the tension between Travis and Samantha was palpable. Their whispered conversations became louder, more heated. Samantha's face was tight with anger, and Travis's frustration was beginning to spill into the hallway, his voice rising with every passing second. But Eleanor didn't care. She had faced them, stood her ground, and now she would finally have the peace she had fought so hard to reclaim. The recess felt like an eternity, but finally, they were called back into the courtroom. The judge sat at her desk, the weight of the decision on her shoulders. The final ruling was clear. Eleanor had acted within her legal rights, and the claims Travis and Samantha had made were without merit. The assets would remain with Eleanor, and they would be protected according to the will she had laid out. As the courtroom emptied, Eleanor stood and took a deep breath. Travis and Samantha were silent now, their fury turned inward. But Eleanor had won, and as she left the courtroom, she couldn't help but feel the weight lifting from her chest. The battle had been long, but she had reclaimed her peace. And nothing was going to take that from her again. The court proceedings had taken a dark turn. What had begun as a legal battle over Eleanor's wealth had now transformed into a frantic display of manipulation, as Sophie and Travis desperately sought to claw their way back into the control they had lost. But Eleanor stood firm, unshaken, her composure a fortress built on the truth that could not be undermined. Each day, Sophie and Travis grew more aggressive. Their accusations, once centered on fairness, now became a venomous campaign to paint Eleanor as a manipulative, heartless mother. They tried to twist the narrative, suggesting that Eleanor had been making decisions in bad faith, that her wealth had been used as a tool to dominate and control her family. Every time they spoke, their voices dripped with entitlement, as though they truly believed they had a right to everything Eleanor had worked for. But Michael, her lawyer, was ready. With every claim, every attempt to skew the truth, he countered with cold, irrefutable evidence. In the courtroom that morning, Eleanor sat quietly, her eyes narrowed as Travis rose to speak once more. His voice was louder now, more desperate, as he repeated the same accusations. "She's been using her wealth to control everything I've done. It's her fault I'm in debt. She wouldn't help me. She never wanted me to succeed on my own." His hands trembled as he gestured toward Eleanor, but she didn't flinch. She knew exactly what was coming. Michael was already standing, the papers in his hands ready to be presented. "Your Honor, we have already heard Travis's claims," he said, his tone unwavering. "But it's time we address the truth. The financial irresponsibility Travis claims was caused not by his mother, but by his own actions." He handed a thick packet of documents to the judge, which she began reviewing. The courtroom grew quiet, the tension palpable. Michael continued, his voice steady. "These are records of Travis's poor financial management, the loans he took out, the gambling habits, and the countless times he failed to make the necessary payments to maintain his business. He has been living in excess without regard for the consequences." A murmur rippled through the room as the judge glanced through the papers, clearly intrigued by what she was seeing. Eleanor's heart raced, but she remained calm, her hands folded neatly in her lap. This was the turning point. The truth was out, and it was about to shift everything. Michael turned toward Travis. "You say that Eleanor has manipulated you, but your financial history speaks for itself. This isn't a case of manipulation. This is a case of irresponsible spending, reckless behavior, and now, an attempt to blame others for your mistakes." Travis shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face reddening. Samantha's expression darkened as she exchanged a tense glance with him. She had always been the one whispering in his ear, encouraging him to push for more, to demand what he thought was owed to him. But now, their narrative was falling apart before their eyes. Michael didn't stop. He brought up Sophie's influence over Travis, pointing to the way she had egged him on, persuading him to act with a sense of entitlement, even when he had clearly made poor decisions. Sophie's role in this is no less significant. She has, for years, pushed Travis to seek more, to demand more, without regard for his own actions. Her influence has led him further down a path of irresponsibility. Sophie's hand tightened around the papers in front of her as the words hit their mark. Her face turned a shade of crimson, but she remained silent, unable to offer any rebuttal to Michael's claims. The truth, raw and undeniable, was too powerful for them to fight. Travis, however, was not done. His frustration boiled over as he shot up from his seat, his voice breaking with emotion. "She's lying. It's all lies. She's trying to ruin me, to take everything I deserve." The judge raised a hand, calling for calm, but Travis's outburst had already set the tone. His credibility, once high, was now crumbling with each word. His desperation was becoming more evident, and the judge's gaze flickered between him and Michael, who stood tall, an embodiment of unwavering composure. Eleanor's heart swelled with a quiet satisfaction. She had watched her son unravel, but this was not about victory. It was about justice. Travis had been given every chance, every opportunity, but he had refused to change. And now, the truth had caught up with him. The judge finally spoke, her voice calm and measured. "I've reviewed the evidence, and I can say with certainty that Travis Foster's claims of manipulation and unfair treatment are not substantiated. The records show a history of irresponsible financial management, and there is no evidence to support the argument that Eleanor Foster acted out of anything but a desire to protect her family." Travis's face drained of color. His eyes widened as the weight of the judgment settled over him. And Eleanor could see the realization in his expression. The game was over. He had lost. As the judge called for a recess before her final ruling, Travis slumped back into his seat, his face a mixture of disbelief and rage. Samantha, who had remained a silent participant in the chaos, finally spoke, but her words were soft, barely audible. "We were never going to win, were we?" Eleanor didn't respond immediately, but she caught her reflection in the polished surface of the courtroom table. There was no gloating, no triumph in her eyes, just the quiet understanding that this moment, this final battle, had been won through the clarity of truth. And as the recess unfolded around her, Eleanor felt the air shift, as if a heavy weight had finally been lifted. She had done everything she could to protect her family, and now, the truth could no longer be denied. The courtroom doors swung open with a quiet groan, and everyone rose as the judge stepped back into the chamber. The air felt different now, thicker, heavier, as if every molecule in the room recognized the moment that was about to unfold. Eleanor could feel her pulse in her fingertips, but she kept her expression smooth, composed. She hadn't fought this hard to waver now. The judge took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and glanced down at the ruling in front of her. A long moment of silence followed, long enough for Travis to shift uncomfortably beside Samantha, long enough for Eleanor to draw a slow breath through her nose, steadying herself. When the judge finally spoke, her voice was calm, clear, and absolute. "After reviewing all evidence presented, the court finds that Eleanor Foster acted within her full legal rights regarding her financial assets and estate planning. Her decisions were justified, well documented, and made with no intention of coercion or manipulation." A ripple moved through the room. Eleanor didn't move. She barely blinked. The judge continued, her tone firming with each word. "Therefore, the petition filed by Travis Foster and Samantha Foster seeking access to, or control over, Mrs. Foster's assets is hereby denied." The words hit Travis like a physical blow. His face went slack, then tightened, his jaw working like he was trying to swallow something too large to go down. Beside him, Samantha stiffened, her eyes narrowing into sharp, glittering slits. Her nails dug into her handbag so hard the leather creaked. "And furthermore," the judge added, glancing toward Eleanor, "Mrs. Foster's revised will and trust arrangements will remain intact and unchallenged unless future evidence warrants reconsideration, which, at this time, it does not." It was over. Completely, irrevocably over. Eleanor let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Not a shaky breath, not a relieved gasp. Just a slow exhale, the kind that comes from reclaiming something that should never have been taken in the first place. She felt taller, lighter, anchored in her power and no longer tethered to someone else's chaos. Behind her, Claire squeezed her shoulder, whispering, "You did it." Michael offered a small, proud nod, but Eleanor didn't allow herself to smile. Not yet. Not here. She simply rose, smoothing the front of her blazer, and prepared to walk out of the courtroom with the dignity she had fought so hard to preserve. Before she reached the aisle, Travis stumbled toward her. "Mom! Wait!" His voice broke, the raw desperation in it slicing jaggedly through the air. Please, I. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I'm sorry. Really, just talk to me. She stopped, but she did not turn. There was a time when those words would have pulled her apart, would have cracked her resolve until she bent toward him, trying to fix everything again. But that woman was gone, buried beneath the months of betrayal, disrespect, and manipulation. Without looking at him, Eleanor said quietly but clearly, "It's too late, Travis." The silence that followed was louder than his outburst earlier. Heavy. Final. Samantha, already fuming, stepped forward with her chin raised sharply. "This isn't over," she snapped. "You think a judge's ruling is the end of this? We'll contest it. We'll find another way." Eleanor finally turned to face her. Her eyes were steady, unyielding. "You can try," she said softly. "But it won't change the truth." Samantha faltered, surprised by Eleanor's calm, by the steel in her voice. She opened her mouth to retaliate, but Travis placed a shaking hand on her arm, pulling her back. Not out of humility, out of fear. He had seen the tide turn, and for once, he understood that pushing further might destroy what little remained of his standing. Family members, previously unsure where to stand, now drifted toward Eleanor. Old cousins, distant relatives, even Rachel stepping forward with tears in her eyes. "Mom," Rachel whispered, hugging her tightly. "I'm so proud of you." Eleanor's arms wrapped around her daughter, and for the first time in what felt like ages, she allowed herself to feel the warmth of genuine support. This moment, this unity, felt earned, deserved. No guilt, no hesitation. As they walked out into the hall, the press of footsteps echoing behind them, Michael leaned in close. "We're not done yet," he murmured. "There's one more filing I need to review with you. Something urgent." Eleanor paused mid-step. "What filing?" she asked. Michael hesitated, a subtle but unmistakable shift. "It's about a bank account we didn't know Travis had been accessing." Eleanor froze. The victory in the courtroom still hung in the air. But now a new tension began to coil around the edges of the moment, tightening, darkening, shifting the ground beneath her feet. A new fight was waiting in the shadows, and this one would cut even deeper. The weeks following the courtroom battle felt like a quiet storm had passed through Eleanor's life, leaving behind a calm she had longed for but had never truly known. It wasn't just the victory, it was the newfound sense of peace, the absence of Travis's manipulative grip, the release from the weight of his constant demands. The battle, however, was far from over. While Eleanor had secured her future, the remnants of the damage Travis and Sophie had wrought continued to shift the landscape of her family. It wasn't long before cracks began to appear in the foundation of Travis and Sophie's relationship. The weeks that followed were filled with tension, arguments, and a growing silence between the two. Travis, once so sure of his entitlement to Eleanor's wealth, was now adrift. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by frustration and confusion. Sophie, the ever-calculating force behind his actions, began to unravel as well, her sharp tongue losing its edge as she struggled to regain control of a situation that had slipped from her grasp. They were no longer the golden couple they once appeared to be. Instead, they were two people caught in a downward spiral, desperate to claw their way back to something they no longer understood. At family gatherings, the distance between Travis and the rest of the family grew. Where once he had been the center of attention, the one everyone turned to for support, now there was only silence. Eleanor had become the undisputed figure of strength and resolve. The relatives who had once feared crossing Travis now found themselves rallying around her, supporting her decisions, validating her actions, and even turning away from the couple who had once so effectively manipulated them all. Eleanor noticed it first with Claire, her best friend, who had always been loyal, but now stood even more firmly beside her. Claire's words one afternoon rang in Eleanor's ears. "You're not just surviving anymore, Eleanor. You're thriving. You've taken back control of your life. Don't let them drag you back into their mess." And it was true. Eleanor had finally built a life free from Travis's demands, and she felt herself standing taller each day. For the first time in years, she could breathe without feeling guilty, without having to justify her every decision. The financial battles had drained her, but now, she was untethered. Stronger than ever, with a clear path ahead of her. It was Rachel, though, who truly helped Eleanor navigate this new chapter. With a quiet, fierce determination, Rachel had stepped forward to support her mother in ways Eleanor hadn't even anticipated. Rachel, always the peacemaker, had stood by silently for years as Travis manipulated and controlled every aspect of their family. Now, she was ready to take action, ready to help Eleanor build a future free from the fear and tension that had plagued their family for so long. One evening, after a long day of meetings and paperwork, Rachel sat beside Eleanor on the porch. The air was warm, the sun dipping below the horizon, and for the first time in years, they were alone together without the looming threat of Travis's manipulations. "I don't know what took me so long to see it," Rachel said, her voice soft but strong. "But I can see now. He's not the person we thought he was. And you—" She paused, taking a deep breath. "You did the right thing. You've always been there for us, Mom. But this is your time now." Eleanor felt a surge of pride and affection for her daughter. Rachel was right. For so long, she had lived under the shadow of guilt, trying to fix things for Travis, sacrificing herself to keep the peace. But now, she didn't have to fix anyone but herself. As Rachel helped Eleanor go through the last of the paperwork, they found themselves laughing. Genuine, carefree laughter. They were making plans for Eleanor's future now, not worrying about how to protect or shield Travis from the consequences of his actions. And for the first time, Eleanor felt like she could truly let go. But that didn't mean Travis and Sophie had given up. The truth was, their financial troubles were only just beginning. With no access to Eleanor's wealth, their lifestyle, built on entitlement and excess, was crumbling. Their business ventures were falling apart, and the facade of success that had once surrounded them was now an empty shell. Eleanor received the occasional message from Travis, desperate for help. But each time she deleted them without hesitation. He had crossed the line. His arrogance had once blinded him to the fact that no amount of wealth could fix his problems. Now, his desperation was starting to unravel him, his once charismatic persona becoming a shadow of what it had been. Sophie, too, was spiraling. Without Travis's financial security, she found herself scrambling for answers, trying to salvage what was left of the life they had built. But she couldn't do it alone. Her cold, calculating ways had lost their grip, and the family she had once dominated was now supporting Eleanor instead. One afternoon, Eleanor found herself sitting alone in her study, reflecting on everything that had transpired. The house, once a place of tension, now felt like a home again. She had been liberated, not just from Travis's demands, but from the emotional baggage that had held her hostage for so long. She was finally free to live on her own terms. And then, as if to punctuate the weight of her newfound peace, a message popped up on her phone. A simple text from Rachel. "We're a team now, Mom. No more looking back." Eleanor smiled, a quiet, contented smile. She had fought for her peace. And now she had it. Not just for herself, but for Rachel too. The battle had taken everything she had, but in the end, it had set her free. As the sun set that evening, Eleanor sat back in her chair, allowing herself to truly relax for the first time in years. She was no longer bound by the past. She had survived. She had won, and this time, it was her life that she was building. Eleanor woke to a quiet morning, one without tension buzzing beneath her skin, without the constant anticipation of a demand, a confrontation, or a crisis not of her making. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, warm and golden, and for the first time in a very long time, she simply lay there and breathed. No calls to answer, no fires to put out, no guilt to shoulder, just freedom. And she intended to savor every drop of it. That summer, Eleanor traveled. Not extravagantly, not in a whirlwind attempt to escape reality. She wasn't running from anything anymore. She chose places she'd always dreamed of, but had never allowed herself to visit. Coastal towns along the California shore, quiet art districts across the Southwest, and a week in the forests near Oregon, where she woke to birdsong and drifted to sleep under a canopy of stars. On one trip, she found herself standing on the edge of a cliff overlooking Big Sur, the wind tugging softly at her hair. The ocean crashed against the rocks below, endless and powerful. Eleanor closed her eyes, letting the salty air fill her lungs. For years, she'd felt trapped, bound by duty, responsibility, and the subtle, relentless manipulation of someone she loved. Now she felt expansive, like her soul finally had room to stretch. She texted Rachel a picture of the ocean, the sun glittering across the waves. "Wish you were here. We'll come together next time. Love you." Mom Rachel responded almost immediately. "Enjoy it, Mom. You deserve this more than anyone." Eleanor smiled and tucked the phone away, returning her gaze to the horizon. Yes, she thought, I really do. Meanwhile, Travis and Sophie were unraveling faster than anyone could have predicted. Their financial troubles deepened by the week. Creditors called, business partners backed away. What little savings they had disappeared into a desperate attempt to maintain the lifestyle they'd built on the foundation of Eleanor's generosity. Their once manicured home grew quiet, lifeless, the air thick with resentment and blame. Eleanor didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate their downfall. She just felt at peace. For the first time, she understood that their struggles were not her burden to carry. They were living with the consequences of their decisions, something she had shielded them from for far too long. And with that weight finally off her shoulders, Eleanor allowed herself to rediscover life. She hosted dinners again, small ones at first, with Claire, Rachel, and a handful of close friends who had stood by her through the hardest moments. Her home filled with laughter, music, the clinking of glasses, and the smell of dishes she hadn't cooked in years. She felt present, engaged, alive. People looked at her differently now, not with pity or judgment, but with admiration. She had become the woman many quietly aspired to be. Someone who stood up for herself, who refused to be used, who rebuilt her life with elegance and strength. And with new confidence came new projects. Eleanor returned to her philanthropic work, expanding it into something far more personal. She launched a mentorship program for women navigating financial abuse and family manipulation, a cause she now knew intimately. The work grounded her. It reminded her that her scars could serve a purpose beyond pain. She also returned to her art. The sketchbooks she had abandoned years ago resurfaced, and soon evenings in her home became filled with charcoal smudges on her fingertips and watercolor palettes spread across the dining table. Each piece felt like a step toward reclaiming little fragments of herself she hadn't realized were missing. Her world was expanding in every direction, and instead of fear, she felt joy, lightness, the freedom of no longer carrying the weight of someone else's choices. One evening, as she sat on her porch watching the last of the daylight fade, Rachel joined her with 2 mugs of tea. They talked quietly about dreams, plans, the future Eleanor was building. There was no tension between them, no fear of upsetting the fragile balance of their family. Just warmth, mutual respect, and a bond that felt stronger than ever. I like seeing you like this, Rachel said softly. Happy? Eleanor smiled. I like being like this. Rachel set down her mug and reached for her mother's hand. You're not done, you know. There's more ahead for you. More than you realize. Eleanor looked at her daughter, surprised by the certainty in her tone. What do you mean? Rachel hesitated, a shift in her expression, something hopeful, something private. I've been meaning to tell you something, she began. Eleanor sat up straighter. Rachel took a breath. Mom, something big is coming, and it's going to change everything. Eleanor's heart paused, a slow, suspended beat. The freedom she'd embraced was real, but the future, that, it seemed, was about to open a new door. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon when Eleanor arrived at the community center, the place where her latest project was beginning to take shape. The warm glow of the evening light spilled across the courtyard, illuminating the faces of the women gathered inside. They were seated in a circle, a quiet hum of conversation and laughter filling the room. It was a new beginning, for them and for Eleanor. Her charity work had flourished over the past year, expanding into something far more meaningful than she'd ever imagined. What began as an idea, offering guidance and support to women navigating financial abuse and manipulation, had become a lifeline for so many. She had created a safe space for them to reclaim their lives, much as she had done for herself. Eleanor entered the room with a quiet confidence, and the women immediately stood, a mixture of respect and admiration shining in their eyes. She had become more than a mentor to them. She was a symbol of hope, a beacon for what was possible when you refused to be a victim of circumstance. Eleanor, one of them called, smiling brightly. You're just in time. We were talking about the new financial workshop you're starting. Eleanor smiled warmly, her heart swelling at the sight of how far they had come. She'd worked tirelessly to ensure these women had the tools to build better futures for themselves, to break free from the toxic dynamics they had been trapped in. They were finding their voices, and Eleanor's heart filled with pride knowing she had helped them find strength in themselves. I'm glad to be here, Eleanor said, taking a seat among them. You all inspire me every day. The conversation shifted to plans for an upcoming retreat, an opportunity for the women to disconnect from the demands of everyday life and focus on their personal growth. The more they spoke, the more Eleanor's sense of purpose grew. She was building something lasting, something that would continue to help people long after she was gone. Back at home, Eleanor sat in her favorite chair by the window, reflecting on everything she had accomplished. Her life had transformed into something she'd once only dreamed of, a life of independence, freedom, and purpose. It was a life that no longer had room for guilt, fear, or the weight of other people's drama. Travis and Sophie were spiraling, but Eleanor remained untouched by their turmoil. She had done everything she could for them. She had given them countless chances to change, to take responsibility for their actions. But they had refused, and now they were facing the consequences of their decisions. The distance between her and them grew wider each day, and Eleanor no longer felt the need to look back. Instead, her focus was on the future, on the lives she could continue to change, the impact she could make. The philanthropic work she was doing had grown beyond her wildest expectations. She was no longer just supporting causes, she was leading them, inspiring others to stand up and take control of their own destinies. Her name had become synonymous with resilience, strength, and independence. Invitations poured in from various organizations to speak at events, to share her story. At first, she had hesitated, unsure of whether she wanted to step into the spotlight. But with Rachel's encouragement, she had taken the plunge, and now Every time she stood before a crowd, she felt the power of her journey reflected in the faces of the women listening. They saw in her what they could become. And that, Eleanor realized, was the most fulfilling part of all of this, the knowledge that she had helped light a fire in others. She glanced at the framed picture on her desk, her and Rachel at one of the retreats, laughing together, a photo of peace, of togetherness. It was the reminder she needed. This was her legacy. Not the wealth or the power she'd once been tied to, but the lives she had changed. The women who now stood strong because of the example she had set. As the evening light faded and the city settled into quiet, Eleanor allowed herself to relax, the weight of the world lifting off her shoulders with each passing moment. She had fought for her peace, and now she was living it, truly living it. Her journey was far from over, but she no longer feared the unknown. She embraced it, knowing that whatever came next, she had already built the life she wanted. And as she looked out at the horizon, the world felt wide open, full of possibilities. For the first time in a long time, Eleanor could finally see it clearly. This was just the beginning. Eleanor stood at the edge of her garden, watching the early morning mist curl around the rose bushes. The sun had just begun to warm the earth, casting a soft golden light over everything. Birds were calling from the trees, their songs a reminder of how far she had come. Her life, once clouded by constant pressure and manipulation, had opened into something entirely new, something all her own. She hadn't realized until recently how deeply she had craved peace, not the peace of a temporary reprieve, but the deep, lasting kind that came with self-reclamation. Eleanor had fought for that peace, through years of sacrifice, emotional turmoil, and countless moments of doubt. But now, standing in the tranquility of her garden, she could feel the weight lifting with every breath. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her away from her thoughts. She didn't even flinch as she reached for it, knowing exactly who it was before she saw the name. Travis. It had been weeks since his last attempt to call, and now, as expected, his messages had begun again. Desperation, blame, guilt. "Mom, we need to talk. This is tearing me apart. Please, I know I made mistakes, but can we find a way to fix this?" Eleanor read the message, her expression unchanged. Her heart did not race. Her palms did not sweat. She simply hit delete. She had done enough. She had given him every chance, every opportunity to change, and he had chosen not to. She didn't need to keep reliving the cycle of guilt and manipulation. She knew Travis and Sophie were still reeling from the loss of access to her wealth. The foundation they had built on entitlement had crumbled, leaving them scrambling, unable to maintain the life they had once thought was theirs by right. But Eleanor couldn't save them anymore. She couldn't even try. They had made their choices, and now they were facing the consequences. Instead of their drama pulling her back in, she had built something far more important. Her life, her work, her health. She had found balance. That afternoon, Eleanor attended a community meeting where she spoke about her journey and the work she was doing with her mentorship program. It was a small gathering, but as she walked into the room, she felt the familiar sense of purpose surge through her veins. The women gathered there were eager to hear her story, to learn from her experiences. Eleanor had become a pillar of strength in her community, someone who had been where they were and had come out the other side with her dignity intact. Her words resonated deeply with them. She didn't stand before them as someone with all the answers. She stood as a testament to resilience, a woman who had fought not just for her rights, but for the right to live a life free of manipulation and fear. "I want you to know something," she said, standing before the group, the room silent as they hung on her every word. "You are not what has happened to you. You are not your circumstances. You are the sum of your choices, and you have the power to make those choices, no one else." The women nodded, some with tears in their eyes, others with quiet smiles of recognition. Eleanor had become more than just a mentor to them. She had become a symbol of hope, proof that you could rebuild, that you could rise above the people who had tried to control and diminish you. In the months that followed, Eleanor focused more on her health and well-being. She had always placed others' needs before her own, but now she prioritized herself. She joined a yoga class, took up hiking, and spent time in nature, allowing the stillness of the world around her to seep into her soul. Her body felt stronger, her mind clearer, and her heart fuller. The weight she had carried for so long, out of guilt, out of obligation, had disappeared, leaving space for joy, for peace. Her relationship with Rachel had blossomed too. They took weekend trips together, laughed over dinner, and spoke about everything and nothing. For the first time in years, there were no barriers between them, just understanding, trust, and love. As Eleanor stood in front of the mirror one evening brushing her hair, she paused and studied her reflection. She was different. The lines on her face told a story of hardship, of battles fought and won. But in her eyes, there was a spark, a light that had been dimmed for so long but was now shining brighter than ever before. But even as Eleanor thrived, Travis's reach didn't fully let go. He had tried to challenge the decision in court, but his case fell apart. No judge could be swayed by desperation alone. As much as he tried to blame her, Eleanor remained unwavering. In quiet moments, Eleanor would hear about the continued strain in his and Sophie's marriage, how Sophie's calculating demeanor had begun to unravel, how their relationship, once so powerful, had become strained. Eleanor wasn't surprised. Sophie had always been the force behind Travis's actions, and without the power and control Eleanor had once provided, their world had fractured. But Eleanor didn't feel guilt. She didn't feel sympathy. She had done what she needed to do. Now, her life was hers. The phone buzzed again that evening. Another message from Travis. She didn't even bother to read it. She had found something far more precious than she ever thought possible. Freedom. Peace. A life where she was no longer bound by the weight of other people's expectations or demands. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And for the first time, that was enough. The years that followed Eleanor's final decision were ones of quiet triumph. Her life had settled into a rhythm of fulfillment, one she had longed for but never thought she'd be able to embrace. She had become something more than just the woman who had survived. She was a force, a presence, a woman who had rebuilt her world from the ashes of betrayal, and in doing so, had created something beautiful. Her charity work continued to expand. What had begun as a small program to help women struggling with financial abuse and manipulation had grown into a powerful network of support, reaching families across the country. Eleanor's mentorship had become a lifeline, her name synonymous with strength and resilience. Women reached out from all walks of life, eager to be part of the community she had created. Some of them came to her in desperation. Others, like herself, arrived with the quiet hope of rebuilding their broken pieces. Eleanor was no longer just a mentor. She had become a movement. She spent her days traveling to workshops, retreats, and conferences, sharing her story, her lessons, and most importantly, her unwavering belief that anyone could take control of their life, no matter how deep the scars ran. Her words resonated in the hearts of those who heard them. She didn't preach from a place of perfection. She spoke from a place of experience, raw, unfiltered, and powerful. At the core of her work was the belief that self-worth could never be defined by others. She had learned that the hard way, and now she was teaching other women to break free from their chains and to find their own value, independent of anyone else's expectations. In doing so, she built a legacy of empowerment that would outlive her. a movement that would continue long after she was gone. Meanwhile, Travis and Sophie faded into the background. Their attempts to claw their way back into Eleanor's life, whether through legal threats or emotional manipulation, had long since failed. They were no longer the center of the family. They were no longer the ones who dictated the terms. Their once powerful influence had diminished, their every attempt to reclaim control falling flat. They remained isolated, estranged from their relatives, their once high status reduced to a mere whisper in the background of Eleanor's ever-growing success. For a while, Eleanor had wondered if, in the quiet corners of her heart, she should feel sorry for them. But the truth was, she didn't. Her peace had been hard-won, and no amount of guilt or self-blame would take that away. She had given them everything they had asked for, and they had taken and taken, never once considering the toll it had taken on her. There was no room for sympathy now. She had earned her freedom, and it was theirs to find, if they ever would. Her days were spent focusing on the work that brought her joy, the women and families she helped, the new projects that sparked her creativity, the partnerships that blossomed as she connected with others who shared her passion for change. It wasn't always easy. The path of social change never was. But Eleanor found fulfillment in the knowledge that the work she was doing had ripple effects beyond what she could see. Every once in a while, she would pause, reflecting on the long journey that had brought her here. It wasn't just about the tangible successes, the growing number of women in her programs, or the accolades she had received over the years. It was the intangible, the moments when she could sense the deep, unspoken gratitude in the eyes of the people she had helped, the strength she saw reflected in them as they rebuilt their lives. One evening, as Eleanor walked through the familiar hallways of a conference center, receiving congratulations from attendees and other speakers, her thoughts turned inward. She thought about the woman she had been, shy, uncertain, constantly apologizing for her existence. And then she thought about the woman she had become, strong, independent, resilient. Her life, though still a work in progress, had bloomed into something beautiful. A quiet voice interrupted her thoughts. "You've changed so many lives, Eleanor. You've changed mine." It was a woman who had come to one of Eleanor's earliest retreats, one of the many who had sat in those circles of women, unsure if they would ever find the strength to move forward. Now, here she was, standing before Eleanor, strong, confident, and successful. Eleanor's eyes softened. "And you've changed your own life. I just gave you the tools." The woman smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude. "No, Eleanor. You gave us the hope to believe we could." Eleanor smiled back, a deep sense of pride swelling in her chest. She had not only given others the tools to rebuild, but she had helped them realize that they could rebuild. That was the heart of the legacy she had created, a legacy of hope, of empowerment, and of the possibility for change. As Eleanor stood before the mirror later that evening, reflecting on the day's events, she realized that her journey was far from over. She wasn't done yet. She could still feel that spark inside her, that fire that told her there was so much more to do, more lives to touch, more people to inspire. She thought about her daughter Rachel and how far they had both come. Rachel had become not just her support, but a partner in this mission, her closest ally, someone she could count on when the weight of it all became too much. Together, they had built something far beyond what Eleanor could have ever done alone. Eleanor's phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was another message, this time not from Travis, but from one of the women in her program. "I've done it, Eleanor. I'm free." A smile tugged at her lips. Her legacy was unfolding before her, one person at a time, and with it, a new generation of women learning to stand on their own. Eleanor looked out the window, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the sky. The world was vast, full of possibilities, and she had just begun to explore it. Eleanor stood on the balcony of her new home, overlooking the sprawling city below. The lights twinkled like stars, stretching out in every direction. For the first time in years, the view felt like it belonged to her. She wasn't just living in a space, she was inhabiting it, fully, without hesitation or compromise. This was the life she had fought for, a life where she was the architect of her own destiny. She took a deep breath, letting the crisp evening air fill her lungs. There was no one else's weight to bear. No obligations, no demands, just the freedom to choose her path, moment by moment. The past few years had been transformative, not just in terms of her professional success or her blossoming network of women she mentored, but in the quiet, powerful ways she had reclaimed her sense of self. Eleanor had built a future of peace and fulfillment, and now, with every decision she made, she was able to move forward with no one holding her back. Behind her, the hum of the city seemed distant, a world apart from the sanctuary she had created. Sophie and Travis, still struggling with the fallout of their own choices, had faded into the background. Their attempts to regain control of her life had failed. Eleanor had refused to let them drag her back into their web of manipulation, and now they were left with nothing but the consequences of their actions. She had long since stopped checking their social media, no longer interested in their drama. They had been given more chances than they deserved. Now, her focus was on the legacy she was creating, on the causes she believed in. Her wealth, no longer a tool for someone else's greed, had become a means for good. She had channeled much of it into philanthropic ventures, projects that aligned with her values and supported the causes she deeply cared about. Women's rights, mental health awareness, and educational programs for underprivileged youth became her primary focus. She had invested not just in charities, but in change, lasting, impactful, transformative change. She had hired a team to help run her foundation, ensuring that the work continued to flourish even when she wasn't directly overseeing it. Her influence had spread across states, impacting communities she'd never imagined reaching. There was a satisfaction in knowing that her financial resources were now contributing to something bigger than herself. Later that week, Eleanor attended a dinner hosted by a group of young women who had completed her mentorship program. They had organized the event to thank her for her guidance, but it was clear that Eleanor was more grateful than they were. Watching them, confident and poised, speaking passionately about their work in the world, she knew her influence had been more than just words. It had been a spark, one they had carried forward, each of them becoming a beacon in their own right. One of the women, Maya, a recent college graduate and former victim of emotional manipulation, stood up to speak. "I don't know where I'd be without Eleanor's mentorship," she said, her voice strong yet filled with emotion. "She didn't just teach me how to survive, she showed me how to thrive, how to set boundaries, how to take control of my own life." Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her chest, a deep sense of peace settling inside her. This was why she had done it. Not for the accolades or the recognition, but for moments like this. Moments where she could see the tangible effects of her work in others, the ripple effects of the change she had inspired. Her thoughts were interrupted by a phone call. It was Rachel, and Eleanor's heart swelled as she answered. "Hey, Mom, I've got news." Rachel's voice was upbeat, but there was a new excitement in it. "I've been offered a position to lead one of the Foundation's new programs. It's in a community I've always wanted to help, and it's exactly what I've been training for." Eleanor felt a surge of pride. She had always known Rachel was destined for greatness, but hearing her voice, filled with that confidence and determination, made her heart swell. "That's incredible, Rachel. I'm so proud of you." "I know I couldn't have done this without you, Mom. You showed me what it means to take control of my own life. Now I'm ready to help others do the same." Eleanor smiled softly. her voice filled with emotion. "You've always had it in you, sweetheart. I just helped you find your voice." As they continued to talk, Eleanor felt the weight of her own growth. Her life, her choices, her work, all of it had brought her to this place of peace, of joy. She had built a future of her own, and it was more fulfilling than she had ever imagined. Later that evening, after the dinner and a few heartfelt goodbyes, Eleanor returned home and settled into her favorite chair. She looked around at her surroundings, everything she had created, from the cozy home filled with laughter to the growing foundation that was helping countless others. Every step, every decision had led her here, and she was at peace. Eleanor leaned back, letting her eyes close for a moment. The world outside could do whatever it wanted. She was no longer weighed down by family drama, by guilt, or by the expectations of others. She had taken control of her life, built something meaningful, and now she had the freedom to live on her own terms. She thought about the future, the lives she could still impact, the women she could still help. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't worry about what might come next. She had everything she needed within her reach: peace, purpose, and the knowledge that she had lived her life the way she had always dreamed. And as she drifted to sleep that night, Eleanor realized that the greatest legacy she had left wasn't the wealth she had accumulated, but the lives she had touched. The fire she had lit in others was far more lasting than anything money could buy. She had found her peace, and that peace had set her free. Eleanor sat in the front row of the grand hall, the soft murmur of the crowd settling as the lights dimmed. The ceremony was formal, yet there was an air of excitement that seemed to hum through the room. She had never imagined she would be here, sitting in the spotlight, not for a personal accolade, but for something far more meaningful. The host called her name, and a ripple of applause followed. She stood gracefully, her black dress catching the light as she walked toward the stage. Her heart fluttered, but only for a moment. She had become accustomed to standing in front of people, sharing her story. But tonight was different. Tonight, she was being recognized not for surviving, but for thriving, for transforming her pain into a force for good. As she reached the podium, Eleanor's eyes scanned the room. There, in the audience, were women she had mentored, some from the early days, some newer faces, each of them now standing tall, with the same sense of pride she felt in her own heart. They had fought their battles, and now they were writing their own stories, just as she had. The award she was receiving was for her contributions to women's empowerment and social justice. But Eleanor knew it wasn't just about the award. It was about what it represented. This wasn't just recognition for her work, it was proof that the seeds she had planted over the years had begun to sprout and grow. Her influence, her story, had become a beacon, a light for women everywhere who had been held back by fear, doubt, and manipulation. And for the first time, Eleanor understood the true power of that impact. She took the microphone, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Thank you for this honor, but truly, it's not just my work that's being recognized tonight. It's the work of every woman who has ever believed she could be more than the circumstances she was born into. This award belongs to all of us." The applause grew louder. Eleanor felt a warmth flood her chest, but she kept her composure. It wasn't the praise or the admiration she sought. It was the knowing, deep down, that she had made a difference, that she had turned her life into something far bigger than herself. After the ceremony, as Eleanor made her way through the crowded hall, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. Her mind wandered back to the beginning of her journey, the struggles, the betrayals, the moments when it seemed like there was no way out. But she had found a way. She had turned every challenge into a stepping stone, every setback into an opportunity for growth. And in doing so, She had created something far stronger than anyone, including Travis and Sophie, had ever anticipated. She could feel the subtle shift in the energy around her. People approached her with genuine respect, eager to share their stories, their gratitude. It was a different kind of connection, one not born of obligation or manipulation, but of true admiration for the path she had forged. Her relationships now were founded on authenticity and mutual respect. She wasn't just admired for what she had done, she was admired for who she was. A woman who had reclaimed her power, who had chosen to live on her own terms, and who, despite it all, had chosen to make the world a better place. Back at home, Eleanor sat in her favorite chair, sipping tea, reflecting on everything that had led her here. The house was quiet, peaceful, and for the first time, it felt like home in the truest sense of the word. The familiar weight of Travis and Sophie's turmoil no longer haunted her. They had long since disappeared from her life, their manipulations leaving nothing behind but the lessons she had learned from them. Their attempts to drag her back into their drama had failed, and the distance between them had only grown. She had been right to let go. She had been right to choose herself. And now, as the evening stretched on, Eleanor allowed herself a quiet smile. The battle had been long, but it had forged her into someone she could be proud of. A woman who had been tested and had come out the other side unbroken. Her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Rachel. "I just saw the award. I'm so proud of you, Mom. You've changed so many lives, and I'm lucky to be part of it." Eleanor felt a lump form in her throat as she typed back a reply. "I couldn't have done it without you. You've been my rock, Rachel. I'm proud of you every day." She paused for a moment, looking at the message. How far they had both come. From the woman who had once been overwhelmed with guilt and doubt, to the woman who had built something lasting, something that would outlive her, a legacy of empowerment, strength, and resilience. She had turned her pain into power, and now that power was helping others rise. The next morning, as Eleanor sipped her coffee on the balcony, the world seemed quieter somehow. There was a deep stillness in her soul, a sense of fulfillment that nothing, no title, no award, could surpass. She had found the peace she had been searching for all her life, and then, with a quiet certainty, she realized that the legacy she had left was not just in the work she had done or the lives she had touched. It was in the example she had set, the strength she had embodied. She had built something far stronger than anyone could have imagined. She had built herself. And that, Eleanor thought as she gazed out over the city, was the greatest achievement of all. "They tried to break me," she whispered to herself, a smile tugging at her lips. "But I built something far stronger."